It's pretty wild when you think about it, that even way back in ancient times, athletes were already looking for that little bit extra.
Oh, absolutely.
They were apparently trying things like sesame seeds, various herbs, just anything for an edge. That drive, it seems, has always been there.
It really has. It's a constant thread, this desire to push limits in sport. What's fascinating is how that basic instinct sort of evolved with, science.
And that evolution, that whole landscape, is exactly what we want to explore for you today. We're using this fantastic resource, the book Doping, Performance-Enhancing Drugs, and Hormones in Sport. And our mission really is to walk you through it chapter by chapter, give you a really solid, structured understanding of this whole complex world.
It's a very detailed book. It really gets into the nitty-gritty, how things work, how they test for them, the whole anti-doping effort, going piece by piece. Yeah, I think that'll really help clarify the different categories.
Okay, perfect. Let's dive in then, starting right at the beginning. Chapter 1, Overview, Doping in Sport. This really lays it all out, from those ancient experiments you mentioned right up to today.
Yeah, it highlights some early examples, things like strychnine, even caffeine, as some of the first attempts to sort of artificially boost performance.
And it traces how the rules kind of caught up over time, right? The formation of governing bodies and eventually WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency.
Exactly. It shows this growing global sense that, okay, we need some kind of standard, some ethical rules for sport.
But the chapter is also pretty upfront about how difficult it is to know just how common doping actually is.
That's a crucial point. Detection methods, well, they have limits, so getting truly accurate stats is tricky.
It mentions that sort of cat and mouse game, doesn't it? New substances pop up, testing plays catch up.
Right. Table 1.1 in the book, it shows the reported cases from the Olympics between '68 and 2014. It gives you a snapshot of positive tests, but it's probably just the tip of the iceberg, really.
And the chapter then focuses on WADA's role. It stresses that their mission isn't just about catching rule breakers.
No, it's broader. It's about protecting, fundamentally, the athlete's right to fair competition, promoting health, equality, all that.
Which is vital for the credibility of sport, obviously. But, as the book notes, WE faces huge challenges.
Yeah, dealing with different legal systems across countries, international cooperation. It makes enforcement really complex.
Then there's the ethical dimension, which Chapter 1 tackles directly. It sort of contrasts that win-at-all-costs approach with ideas of fair play and sportsmanship.
It really makes you think about what we value in sports, doesn't it? And it points out the huge financial rewards now. You can see how that pressure might tempt some athletes.
Now, one area that always sparks debate is therapeutic use exemptions, or 2Es. The chapter explains these. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. So a TU is basically a medical pass. If an athlete has a genuine medical condition requiring a substance that's normally banned, they can apply for a TU.
Okay, so it's meant to ensure athletes aren't penalized for needing legitimate medical treatment.
That's the intent, exactly. But the chapter also mentions that there's sometimes controversy, questions about whether they're always granted appropriately. So it's a necessary system, but not without its complexities.
Got it. So Chapter 1 really sets the scene. History, prevalence issues, WAD's role and challenges, the ethical minefield, and TWEs. A solid foundation.
Absolutely. And that leads us right into Chapter 2, which gets specific. Anabolic androgenic steroids.
Right, the synthetic versions of testosterone.
Yeah.
The chapter starts with their actual medical uses.
Things like treating endocrine problems or diseases that cause muscle wasting. In those cases, boosting testosterone is therapeutically beneficial.
But let's be honest, in sports, the reason is usually different.
Oh, definitely. The main driver for athletes is boosting muscle mass and strength significantly.
How do they actually do that?
Well, the chapter explains they basically ramp up protein synthesis. Think of it like turning up the dial on the body's muscle-building machinery.
And it even touches on the really detailed stuff, like what's happening biochemically inside the cells.
Yeah, it gets quite technical there. What's also interesting is how the research findings evolved. Early studies were sometimes a bit contradictory.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but later, more robust research confirmed they do enhance performance, especially for strength and power.
Okay, but then there's the dark side. Chapter 2 lays out the adverse effects pretty clearly.
It does, and it helpfully breaks them down into potentially reversible things like acne, mood issues, and the potentially non-reversible, more serious ones.
Like heart damage. Liver problems.
Exactly. Cardiovascular issues, liver damage. Table 2.2 in the book lists these side effects system by system. It's quite a sobering list.
It really underscores the health risks, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It shows the potential cost. The chapter also gives a quick mention to other anabolic substances like DHEA, which are also misused for similar effects.
So, Chapter 2, How Steroids Work, Proof They Boost Performance, but also, crucially, the very serious health dangers. Definitely not something to take lightly.
Not at all. And then Chapter 3 shifts gears to stimulants. These are interesting because they affect the body and mind in quite different ways.
Yeah, the chapter lists reasons athletes might use them: trying to lose weight, maybe staying focused.
Losing weight, staying awake during, say, long training sessions or events, improving concentration. Common examples given are caffeine, your everyday stimulant, up to much stronger things like amphetamines.
How do they help with weight or focus?
Well, they can increase metabolism and suppress appetite, which helps with staying lean. And for focus, they work on the brain's neurochemistry.
Okay, like neurotransmitters.
Exactly. They influence chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine, which affect alertness and mood.
And does the evidence show they actually work for performance?
The chapter suggests yes, particularly for endurance activities and also for short, intense bursts of effort. There's evidence there.
But again, there must be downsides.
Oh, definitely. The speeding and crashing phenomenon is mentioned: anxiety, agitation, can't sleep, then this big energy slump afterwards. Plus, potential heart problems are a real concern.
And these are often controlled substances, right?
Many are. Table 3.1 lists stimulants scheduled by the DEA in the U.S., which highlights the regulatory concerns and abuse potential. So yeah, Chapter 3 shows stimulants can offer an edge, but with significant risks and side effects.
Okay, moving from stimulants to Chapter 4. Glucocorticoids. These have legitimate medical uses too, don't they?
They do, primarily as anti-inflammatories and for lung issues. Think treating asthma, reducing inflammation in the airways is critical for athletes with that condition.
But athletes might misuse them for other reasons.
That's the concern discussed. Maybe trying to speed up recovery from injury because of the anti-inflammatory effect, or maybe hoping to breathe easier even without asthma, or even influencing fat metabolism, though the evidence for that last one is less clear.
The chapter mentions they have broader effects too on the endocrine and immune systems.
Yes, they're powerful hormones, so they don't just act locally. Their effects are quite widespread in the body.
So the big question, do they actually enhance performance? The chapter title is a bit ambiguous. Yes, no, and maybe.
Yeah, it reflects the evidence. They might help recovery, sure, but direct performance benefits. It's less certain, more context dependent. The research findings are a bit mixed on that front.
And long-term use isn't great either.
No. The chapter talks about side effects like pseudo-Cushing syndrome, issues with mineral balance. Prolonged use definitely carries risks. Table 4.1 lists some common types.
Okay, so glucocorticoids. Clear medical uses, especially anti-inflammatory, but more ambiguous performance benefits and definite risks with misuse or long-term use.
Precisely. Which brings us to Chapter 5, peptide protein hormones. This is where we get into things like growth hormone and EPO.
Again, starting with their medical roles.
Yes. Growth hormone is crucial for development, metabolism. EPO, erythropoietin, stimulates red blood cell production essential for carrying oxygen, so medically vital for certain deficiencies.
But in sports, they're misused for, well, different goals.
Right. Growth hormone, the aim is usually increased muscle mass. EPO, it's all about boosting red blood cells to get more oxygen to the muscles, which enhances endurance.
The chapter mentions WADA prohibits a list of these.
Yes. Table 5.1 lists prohibited peptide hormones and related substances. It's a major focus for anti-doping agencies.
And the chapter acknowledges they can work for performance, saying it works within limits.
It does. The performance-enhancing effects of both growth hormone and EPO are documented. But, crucially, it also stresses the limitations and the very significant health risks.
What kind of risks are we talking about?
Really serious ones. For growth hormone abuse, there's acromegaly, abnormal growth of bones. For EPO, it's blood hyperviscosity, basically, thickened blood.
Which sounds dangerous.
Extremely. It increases the risk of heart attacks, strokes, potentially fatal consequences. Table 5.2 details EPO side effects specifically. It's a stark warning.
Wow. Okay, so Chapter 5. Potent performance enhancers, yes, but with incredibly severe, even life-threatening health risks attached.
Absolutely. A very clear message there. Next up, Chapter 6 looks at beta-2 agonists.
These are primarily asthma medications. Table 6.1 lists some common ones.
Exactly. They act as bronchodilators. They open the airways. For an athlete with asthma, they're often essential for breathing properly during exercise.
But the chapter suggests misuse happens too.
Yes, particularly when taken systemically, like in pill form rather than inhaled. The hope might be to enhance breathing beyond normal levels, or maybe for potential anabolic effects like muscle growth or fat loss, though the evidence for the latter in humans at typical doses is limited.
How they work? Something about the adrenergic system.
Right. They stimulate specific adrenergic receptors.
Yeah.
Figure 6.1 in the book shows these receptor types. Their main effect is on the airways, but systemically they can affect other things.
So the rules distinguish between asthmatics and others. The chapter asks, asthmatics? Yes or maybe? Everyone else.
That's the key regulatory point. Inhaled forms are generally permitted for diagnosed asthmatics with proper documentation, like a TUE, but systemic use by non-asthmatics is usually banned because of the potential performance edge and side effects.
And what are those side effects?
Mainly cardiovascular concerns, increased heart rate tachycardia, irregular heart rhythms called arrhythmias, even fainting or syncope.
So Chapter 6 clarifies their proper medical use, the potential for misuse, especially systemically, and the associated heart risks.
Correct. Now, Chapter 7 moves into hormone and metabolic modulators. This gets complex.
It starts with the roles of androgens and estrogens and how modulators are used medically.
Yes, they're used to treat various conditions linked to hormone imbalances, things like certain cancers, reproductive health issues. They work by influencing the body's hormonal environment.
And athletes might try to manipulate this balance.
That's the idea discussed, trying to enhance the anabolic effects of androgens, perhaps. Or maybe trying to block unwanted side effects from other substances they might be taking.
The chapter talks about specific types, like SARMs and SERMs.
Yes, selective androgen receptor modulators and selective estrogen receptor modulators. The idea is they selectively target receptors in different body tissues. Table 7.1 gives examples, and Figure 7.1 shows interactions with androgen receptors.
But the evidence on whether they work for performance or their side effects isn't clear-cut.
Exactly. The chapter highlights that research findings are often contradictory or ambiguous. It's an area where the science is still catching up in some ways.
Still, potential risks are mentioned.
Oh, yes. Serious ones like blood clots, thrombosis, embolisms. Also hormonal side effects like hot flashes or signs of excess androgens. Table 7.2, showing the main steroid hormones, helps put these potential disruptions in context.
So, Chapter 7. Complex mechanisms, potential for misuse, but murky evidence on effectiveness, and definitely significant health risks to be aware of.
A good summary. Then Chapter 8 addresses narcotics or opioids.
The chapter starts with their main effects, pain relief and euphoria, right? In the arms of Morpheus.
That phrase captures it well. They powerfully alter pain perception and mood.
And the reason athletes might misuse them is pretty straightforward.
Usually, yes. It's about masking pain from injuries to keep training or competing. Figure 8.1 shows the opioid receptors they act on in the nervous system.
The chapter explains they interact with our body's natural pain relief system.
Correct. Our bodies have endogenous opioids, and these drugs hijack that system. Table 8.1 details the receptor subtypes and their effects.
But the chapter title warns these are substances that work too well.
That points directly to their incredibly high potential for addiction. The risk of dependence, the chapter stresses, vastly outweighs any perceived short-term benefit for an athlete. Table 8.2 lists the many side effects, common and less common.
And the conclusion really hammers home the addiction risk.
Absolutely. Addiction, addiction, and addiction. It's the overwhelming danger here, making their use in sport unacceptable and prohibited.
Okay, so despite the pain relief, the addiction risk makes narcotics a definite no-go in sports.
Precisely. Now, Chapter 9 deals with beta blockers.
Medical uses first things like high blood pressure, anxiety. They block adrenaline effects.
That's right. They help manage the body's stress response, useful in various cardiovascular conditions.
But in sports, they're misused in specific disciplines.
Yes, sports requiring extreme calm and fine motor control. Think shooting, archery, maybe golf. They use them to control heart rate and reduce hand tremors. Table 9.1 lists some common ones.
How do they achieve that calming effect?
By blocking the action of stress hormones like adrenaline on certain receptors. Table 9.2 shows their effects on cardiovascular parameters, slowing heart rate, reducing tremor.
And the chapter says there's strong evidence of performance enhancement for these sports.
It does. In activities where steadiness and calm under pressure are key, beta blockers have been shown to give a real advantage.
But, like everything else, there are side effects. From lethargy to impotence.
Yeah, that covers the range. Fatigue, low energy, lethargy, abnormally slow heart rate, bradycardia, low blood pressure, hypotension. And yes, erectile dysfunction can be side effects. So even in these precision sports, there are risks.
So Chapter 9, specific use in precision sports, proven enhancement effect there, but carries its own set of undesirable side effects.
Got it. Which leads us toward the end, Chapter 10, athlete testing, analytical procedures, and adverse analytical findings. This is the practical side of anti-doping.
How the testing actually happens. It outlines the PEDs procedures.
Yes, very detailed, standardized procedures. Table 10.1 walks through the 11 steps of sample collection, emphasizing the strict protocols needed to ensure integrity.
It's incredibly rigorous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Then it talks about the lab analysis.
Right, the high-tech methods used to detect banned substances, things like GCMS and LCMS gas and liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, super sensitive techniques. Table 10.2 lists the most common categories they find.
But the chapter is balanced, discussing strengths and weaknesses of these tests.
Mm-hmm. It acknowledges how good the tests are, but also the limitations. Labs are always playing catch-up with new substances or methods athletes might use to cheat.
Which brings us to how athletes try to avoid detection.
Yeah, the chapter mentions things like masking agents trying to hide a banned substance. Figure 10.1 actually illustrates the dangers of using diuretics for this purpose, or microdosing, taking tiny amounts that are harder to detect. It's a constant challenge.
And finally, what happens if an athlete does test positive?
The chapter explains the whole process after an adverse analytical finding, or AAF. The athlete's rights, the hearing process, potential sanctions if a violation is confirmed. Figure 10.2 maps out these steps. It emphasizes due process.
Okay, so Chapter 10 gives you the full picture of testing. Collection, analysis, the challenges of detection, and the consequences of a positive test. Really crucial stuff.
Absolutely essential to the whole system. And that takes us to the final chapter, Chapter 11, the future of performance enhancement in sport. Looking ahead.
It starts by asking, basically, are current prevention and detection methods actually working?
Yeah, a fundamental question. It also looks at athlete education. Is that enough on its own to deter doping? Probably not entirely.
And it acknowledges that ongoing arms race between dopers and testers, asking if it's even possible to truly stay ahead.
A realistic perspective. Then it gets into more future-facing topics like genetic doping.
Oh, right. Is that the next big thing? And how would you even test for that?
Huge challenges there for sure. The chapter also brings in figure 11.1 about gender concepts and briefly touches on how evolving ideas about gender might intersect with anti-doping rules down the line.
Interesting connection. Does it touch on the legalization debate at all?
Briefly, yes. It mentions the arguments for and against legalizing and regulating certain substances, which is obviously a really complex and contentious issue.
And it finishes by just asking, what's next?
Pretty much. A forward look at the ongoing challenges, new technologies, ethical debates that will keep shaping sport and anti-doping efforts.
So Chapter 11 really leaves you thinking about the future, the effectiveness of what we do now, and the new frontiers like genetics and ongoing ethical questions.
Exactly. It's a thought-provoking end to the book.
Well, that really was a deep dive, going through doping, performance-enhancing drugs, and hormones in sport, chapter by chapter. It's just so clear how complex this whole area is. You've got the history, the science, the ethics, the testing. It all intertwines.
It really does. The book does a great job, I think, of showing the mechanisms, the detection methods, but also the constant struggle involved. Understanding the why behind athlete use and the why behind the rules is just as important as knowing the what.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for you listening. In a world where we value athletic achievement so highly, where rewards can be so massive, what does the future of fair play actually look like? Can we ever achieve a truly level playing field? Or is it always going to be this kind of ongoing tension between human ambition and the spirit of sport?
Yeah.
Definitely something to mull over.